Well, if you are new to this channel because of the particular subject matter on this video, welcome. My name is Matt. I'm a do-it-yourselfer based out of Denver, Colorado in my home garage here. And on this channel, we typically focus on learning advanced do-it-yourself diagnostics for engine performance, check engine lights, electrical, things like that. But occasionally we break away for other subject matter, including this popular series, which will probably be the last one of its kind. I do not want to become a tool channel. There are plenty of those. But I, once in a while, will go over some of the favorite tools that I have in my personal toolbox. This is not a promotional video. I am not trying to sell these things. I am not compensated from any of these companies or manufacturers or anything like that. These are just tools that I have that I particularly find I can't live without, and I'm just going to share them with you. Now, in this particular special, also I'm going to share with you some suggestions that I have for tool organization as well, so that you can optimize your efficiency and also your ergonomics. According to popular requests from the two previous videos of this, so if you like this video and you haven't seen the two previous ones, you're going to want to check the description of the video. I will put a link to the other two favorite tools videos that I have. But a very common request was that I show the actual catalog numbers and ordering information for those tools. I will go ahead and do that in this video, since this is probably the last one of this type I'm going to do, so we stay with the nature of the channel. The other request, and this was a really clever one, was to show some tools that are homemade, that I've designed myself as well. Every person who does car stuff has probably designed their own tools. I certainly am no exception to that, so I will also share some of those as well in this video. All right, let's go ahead and get started with something really basic that on this channel you will never see, and that is we're going to look at some oil change stuff that I just can't live without. All right, this is the bulk of my oil change setup here. So we've got a couple things we're going to go over. This is an interesting one. As you can see, I'm kind of a fan of these sort of cup design for oil filter wrenches like this. I've got others that I keep in another place, fairly extensive collection. I find these to be the easiest and most accessible, but of course I do have your typical traditional oil filter wrench if I don't have the right size or whatever. Not a big fan of these because they tend to dent the filters, gives a little unprofessional result. This is a particular must-have. This is a oil filter wrench for that cartridge-based cover for the Toyota Camrys and things like that, where it's got those little discs and you're trying to use your big giant pipe wrench to remove that. They're always super, super crazy tight, but this just fits right over those notches on there and makes for easy work with those particular wrenches. When I do an oil change, I want to make as little mess as possible. I do not like getting my hands dirty. So this is the oil udder. I use this to wrap around the oil filter once I break it loose and loosen it up, and I can direct the flow of oil into my drain pan. And this is also really good if the oil filter maybe isn't straight up and down and it's kind of one of those sideways one that makes a bit of a mess. This helps to control the mess that drips out from your oil filter. Another device I'll use to control my oil spillage is this really handy device right here. This is basically sort of a plastic covered piece of sheet metal, but it's totally pliable. You can make a funnel out of it if you want to, fold it like a taco and make kind of a drain ditch here. But the idea with this is I can put this pretty much anywhere in the car, totally bendable, totally flexible, and again, direct my flow of fluids down to my drain pan. I don't only use this for oil changes, I also very frequently use this when I'm doing things like draining coolant, or if I'm removing a water pump and I don't want the coolant to get all over the belts and things like that. I'll just put this right under where I'm working, fold it into a position there so that it'll direct the flow anywhere I want it to go. Easy to clean up, non-stick surface, really pretty cool tool. Just realized how dirty this thing was, but if you're worried about cross-contaminating your fluids, little degreaser on there, and you can see you can actually clean it up pretty good. This thing gets a lot of use. And this little gizmo here, really simple but handy. It's a really strong magnet, so you can get to that oil pan bolt after you crack it loose. Spin it out with your hands being way, way out of the direction of that hot oil coming out, making a big mess all over your hands and everything. Really, really handy way to remove that oil pan bolt without making a mess of yourself. And this is my oil drain bucket. Most people have some variation of this thing. So you can capture your oil. It's nice and wide like this and allows you, most cars, to drain both the filter and the oil pan at the same time because there's enough diameter there. Cap it up, take it right over to your O'Reilly's to dump your used oil. Really handy to have. The only thing with this is, as a do-it-yourselfer, when you've got the car raised and you're draining your oil, as soon as that oil from the oil pan strikes this surface, it splatters everywhere like you're cooking bacon and splattering grease everywhere. So as a simple solution to that, I have this pad here. It's basically just a big Brillo pad. Fits right in there. You could drop oil from a skyscraper, and when that oil stream hits this pad, it just smooths it out. No splatter, no spill, no mess. The other thing, obviously, that's really nice, it'll capture any debris, bolts, whatever you've got here as well. Keep them from going into your pan. All right, my hands actually got way dirtier from this particular demo than they do if I do an actual oil change. All right, along the theme of spill control and not being messy, this is a spill-free funnel kit. This comes with all kinds of adapters that I've only ever once found a vehicle that didn't quite fit for these adapters on the radiator neck or on that coolant reservoir. You can just simply find your correct adapters, seal up that radiator neck, have your little thing to screw on there one way or another, and you get that right combination on there. Just stick your funnel on there and you can fill it with coolant. And if the radiator neck fills to the very top, none of your coolant spills out all over the place. And if the system burps or something like that, you've got your lid on here, keeps your coolant from spilling all over the engine. Also has a number of these adapters if you need things at a different angle or something to get around the cowl or whatever. There we go. Now we can get around obstructions. Yeah, I can tell you I've known about these for a really, really long time. Always thought they were just a gimmick, but I can tell you now that I have one of these, it is just awesome. I use it every time I fill a car with coolant and help to burp the system and everything. Really, really keeps your mess down to a minimum, gives a nice professional result when they get their car back and it doesn't smell like burning coolant. All right, if you work on a number of vehicles, you have started to find a phenomenon lately with newer vehicles that your sockets never seem to really fit the wheel lug nuts on most newer cars. The reason for this is because they started going to half sizes for whatever crazy reason. Thus, you need the Steelman Pro kit here. This includes your typical sizes for wheel lugs like 21 millimeter, but also the odd 21.5 millimeter on the other side. You just need a small half-inch extension to get there. We've got a 22 and a 22.5, 18.5, 19.5. So this is the solution you need if you're running into an issue that your socket set just doesn't seem to be working on some of these newer lug nuts. Now we can go on and on and on, endlessly buying tools until we all go broke. So again, just a reminder, my philosophy on buying tools is very simple. I don't buy tools because I think they look cool, or maybe someday it'll be nice to have it, or maybe that philosophy, hey, better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. There's always a way to work around, especially if you don't regularly do stuff. But my criteria for buying tools, such as this one, is if I know that the tool will regularly, consistently save me time, or if it is absolutely necessary and there is no way else to do the job. This particular tool is the former. This is a one-way directional valve here. I actually have 4 of them. And the idea is that I take these and I connect them up to some little hose that will fit, put a little clamp on here as well. And the idea is this will fit over, there we go, a little spring clamp on there to keep those hoses tight. And the idea with this is the hoses fit right over that end of the brake caliper bleeder valve. And this allows me to bleed the brakes, all 4 of them at one time, by pushing down the brake pedal, bleeding out the fluid. But then because it's a one-way valve, it won't suck the fluid back in. Makes super easy work of brake bleeding without needing like a vacuum system or an assistant to pump the pedal for you or something like that. Really handy device that, again, saves me time consistently. Again, use your discretion. If you're a do-it-yourselfer working on your own car, you know, you have to bleed your brakes once, you know, in an eternity. Whereas I'm bleeding brakes like 3 or 4 times a month, right? So this is well justified. All right, in an earlier tools video, I showed you this gadget here. This is the harmonic balancer puller for LS engines, so that instead of struggling with those stupid 3-jaw pullers that just, you put 2 of the jaws on and the 3rd one isn't on, so you put the 3rd one on, the other 2 come off. This just twists right into place. Remember that guy? Well, that's for the LS engines. If you need a solution, instead of fighting with the jaws on your 3-jaw puller for other engine applications, there's this guy right here with ratcheting arms for your 3 jaws. So you can put them into any position and they will stay in place. Oh my gosh, this thing is worth its weight in gold. There's different sizes of this. This is a particularly small one, as you can see. But the design to be able to ratchet and position your jaws is just a huge time saver. All right, let's look at some homemade tools now at your request. This is a homemade oil pump priming tool. So if you're familiar, a lot of the older engines, there'll be a shaft that goes down and connects in with the camshaft, and as the camshaft turns, it turns the shaft here, which has a little screwdriver thing on the bottom of it to drive the oil pump. So all I did was I just took one of these and I ground off the gears from it so it's nice and smooth. That way this goes in there, clears the gears for the camshaft so it doesn't engage. Put your drill on the other end of it here. This part here fits in so oil doesn't spill out of the hole. It helps to seal up that hole where the distributor would go into. Of course, the distributor would normally also spin with this as well, but you just spin that with your drill and be able to prime your oil pump like after an engine rebuild or major work or something. I've got several of these of different sizes for different engines with that design that typically have that distributor-driven oil pump drive. All right, if you've watched this channel for any number of years, you've definitely seen me use this before. Not a homemade tool, but just a repurposing of a different tool. This is a sewing tool called the seam ripper. You basically kind of get this into the seam and you just rip along and pull up your, actually you cut your threads for a seam. And I use this all the time to open wiring harnesses, to cut through the tape and things like that. So really handy tool here. Also, got this version here with a little red ball on the non-cutting side so that it prevents you accidentally cutting through the wires. Another homemade tool right here. This is my crack pipe. No. So this is what I use on a lot of vehicles with the press-in transmission pan filter, where the transmission filter has that hard gasket that press fits into the transmission itself, and you want to get that sealing ring out without destroying the aluminum surfaces that it's pressed into, so you don't want to try to use a screwdriver or pliers or something like that too much. It gets a little hairy. So it turns out that the diameter of this pipe, which is 1/2 inch, will screw right into that gasket ring. And then the purpose for this end here is once I've got that nice and securely screwed in to that O-ring assembly, I can strike that with a hammer and it'll just yank that assembly right out from the transmission with no damage whatsoever. This piece here is if I need a little extra leverage for spinning it or for striking with the hammer, I can just screw that into the end. All right, in that same section of the hardware store, you can get these little plumbing end caps that I've retapped. And they just so happen to be retapped to fit the bottom of a tie rod end assembly. So you just screw these onto the tie rod end assembly there after removing the nut. Take a big hammer here, strike it up. You can free up that tie rod end assembly without mushrooming the end of your tie rod, and also, of course, without mushrooming the end of that nut, making it harder to put it back on without just having the thing spin and spin and spin on you all day. All right, another homemade tool, not so much homemade, but kind of repurposed. But this is my, well, has been, it's now since been upgraded. My preferred method for a oil pan or transmission pan removal tool where you've got the gasket in there that the pan is stuck, and you kind of don't really want to use a pry bar so much because you don't want to bend the pan, you want to break the seal. I use this tool to try to get in there. I can hit this side with a hammer, maybe tap it in. Not a real good idea to use like a chisel or a screwdriver because, again, you're going to mar that aluminum surface most likely, and this is a really great way of doing it. Now, since then, I've discovered my replacement for this tool that I no longer do this with, and that is this tool. That is not homemade. This is an actual tool you can buy that does the same thing, only it's much better. Got this little handle here, you got this little blade device, the same thing as what I was doing with my putty knife here. Take a hammer back there to drive that blade in between the pan and the mating surface without doing damage. The other nice thing about this, it's incredibly strong. You can pry on it without having it bend or without breaking. You may be tempted to use like a razor blade or something for this. Really recommend you don't do that. It's just going to break in between the pan and mating surface. So really, really handy tool that has replaced my homemade one. All right, every member of my channel that's been here a while knows this tool here, which I've modified since. This is just paper clip. I use this all the time if I'm doing a relative compression testing on a vehicle and I'm working by myself and I just want to make a remote starter for the vehicle without having to go in the vehicle and crank it over and everything. I just use this to jump the load side terminals on the starter relay. The tape is because it can get a little bit hot if you're doing this for an extended period of time, and the tape just keeps my fingers from getting burned. But definitely one of my favorite homemade tools. You see this on the channel all the time. Another one of my favorite homemade tools, this is a fluid extractor, particularly useful for getting brake fluid out of the reservoir. That's also the reason for the weird curve on the hose here. This is kind of a stiff hose here that you can mold into a shape, get it kind of behind that splitter in the reservoir. 50 mil syringe here, good capacity for drawing. I don't even know, I've had these syringes for 100 years. Just working in a laboratory for my regular job as a scientist, you get syringes and tubing all over the place. So not quite sure. I guess you can probably buy syringes on Amazon, 50 mil syringes like this. By the way, this also makes a really good turkey baster. Not this exact one, but like a different one just for cooking purpose. Great turkey baster. All right, these look like fuel line removal tools, but they most definitely are not. These are very specialized to remove the cooling lines, the oil cooling lines from a radiator. So if you've got the radiator that has this design right here, and typically what you would do is loosen that up with a line wrench, but if you've ever tried lining up those threads again, oh my gosh, it's horribly difficult, and they cross thread so easily. If you look really closely, these tools here have these little triplicate, these are different sizes, these little triplicate kind of projections here, and you'll put them in behind the radiator line and just give it a twist. And if you look really closely at the clips for those radiator lines, they're clipped in with a 3-prong clip. So just slip that in there, give it a twist, separates all 3 prongs of that little tiny metal clip in there. Just pull the line straight out. All right, everybody's got a bunch of pry bars. I've got quite a few pry bars, but almost all of them have this feature on the end here that they've all got different sized tapered tips like this. These are more useful than the pry bar itself most of the time, in that you can use this for lining up the holes on things like struts or control arms, things like that. And you just have this different size tapers here for different applications, be able to pry things into place, line them up. You just simply cannot live without these. So much more useful than a screwdriver, for example, because of the tapering. Once you get those holes lined up, you can hammer this up into place or push it into place a little bit. And as that taper starts moving up, it perfectly aligns those holes so that you can fit a bolt through it or whatever. So you got to get some of these tapered pry bars like this. Oh my gosh, I use these all the time. Such a time saver. All right, in a previous video, we covered this absolute must-have, this radiator hose clamp or coolant hose clamp remover tool that you can remotely get into tight places and get to those hard to reach clamps. But what we didn't cover in that previous video is actually, when I don't need this, my favorite go-to for removing those spring type radiator clamps. So these have sort of a universal grip in the jaws here that once they grab on, that clamp is not coming out. Ratcheting as well, so it'll help hold the position. And I've got this straight and this angled one to be able to get into a little more difficult positions here. So these are absolutely far and away my go-tos, even more than this by far. And it also is a lot better than just using a pair of pliers by hand. This long reach like this, and this special design, if you notice how it opens in the middle, this allows you to get into really tight places without having to have the jaws particularly open wider than you need, because it opens in the middle here. So it actually makes it quite a bit more accessible in hard to reach places. I came across another homemade tool. All right, while it would look like that would have many functions, this particularly has, up until recently, been my CV axle removal tool. So basically I would just, because this is angled at exactly the right angle, on a lot of those cars where it's really hard to reach behind that CV axle and strike it out of the transmission with a hammer or something, usually use a chisel, a punch, something like this. But this nice long tool allows me to get right behind that CV axle, and then this long handle like this allows me to strike this safely from far away with a hammer without being too close to the exhaust or body components or whatever, and just pop that axle right out. Now, since then, I have come to find my new way of doing this, and that is this handy and surprisingly inexpensive set from OEMTOOLS 37305 here. And with this set, you just simply get this end like a pickle fork. It's just a wide pickle fork. You get that end between that CV axle and the transmission and just strike the other end with a hammer. It frees it up a little bit, and if you need a little more room, you take this guy, which has a wider end on it, to finish it out and be able to pry it away. All right, if you haven't already spent $400 on tools that you suddenly realize you can't live without, we're about to definitely increase it by just a few more dollars, or start it off by just a few more dollars with this guy right here. Yes, it's an inspection mirror, of course. I know every beginner, this is one of the first things they buy, right? But wait for it, wait for it. Yes, so my inspection mirror that met its demise after 10 years of service when I accidentally stepped on it and broke it, and I wanted to find a replacement mirror, and I just happened to come across this design here where you have the little plunger and you can change the angle of the mirror. And I was like, oh my gosh, all my problems in the entire world have just been solved. This thing is so handy. As a matter of fact, it's so handy, I had to get a second smaller one for like really tight places or whatever. All right, we're going to get into organizational tips in a minute here. This drawer here is my Serpentine and fan tool drawer here. A couple of things in here I can't live without. First of all, This particular setup here, and we've got several of these pass-through design sockets for it so that it's really, really low profile. This, by the way, is a ratcheting wrench here that goes onto this extender at all kinds of different angles. This, to date, is the best tool I have ever found for those hard-to-reach serpentine belt tensioners that are right up against the firewall. All the time I've got people that are trying to do their own serpentine belts and they can't access them with their regular tools. They bring it to me, and in just minutes I can free up the serpentine belt just using this gizmo. They wonder how I do it. So this is definitely my favorite tool for serpentine belts there. The crow's feet here also can be really handy for serpentine belt work. These are fan wrenches right here, and I really like this particular one. This is my favorite fan clutch wrench here because it's actually 4 wrenches in one. If we look real carefully, we've got this sort of wider area, this more narrow area here, again a wider area and a more narrow area, but different than on the other side. You also see we've got 1/2 inch holes for a 1/2 inch drive to be put on here and really get some leverage on it. So that tool right there replaces 4 of these other tools. Another really handy couple of things to have are things like these here. A lot of cars do not actually have tensioners for things like the power steering belts and things. You have to stretch those belts on. And on some cars, I particularly worked on a Ford a little while ago, it was particularly frustrating, especially because this tool here didn't work because the power steering pulley is so close to the firewall that I couldn't get my usual stretch belt tool that just clamps on to the pulley, whatever it is. Typically you use this on the crankshaft pulley, tighten it down, and then it forces the belt on. But that's where this comes in. So there's a couple different flavors of these. I've got a metal one here that's a little more durable than this plastic one. And these are install and removal tools. So these you just simply clip right on to the pulley, whatever the pulley is, power steering pump, alternator, crankshaft, whatever. You just clip this on there and you see there's different angles on this here. So once on this one, once that comes along and that belt comes around, this is going to push that belt off of the pulley on the remove tool. The install is exactly the opposite. Here the belt will just loosely attach onto there, but as this rolls around, as you crank the engine, the angle forces that belt back onto the pulley. Such an easy way of putting the belts on. There's other ways of doing it. I used to use zip ties, for example, to try to force the belts on, but this is such an easy and quick way to do it. The reason, by the way, for the metal ones here, this is typically what I use is the metal ones, but that Ford that I was working on recently, the metal ones, again, the belt was too close to the firewall that I just couldn't get my install pulley in there because it kept dragging against the firewall. So I was able to just cut some of the plastic on this plastic one and make it work. All right, must-have tool if you do a lot of timing jobs. This is a universal cam holding tool. You just simply separate the jaws out, get it in the right orientation, and put it between the spokes of one of your camshafts. And this will hold that camshaft in position while you remove the camshaft nut. Particularly, I use these if I'm doing water pumps on the Toyota engines, the Highlanders and whatever, and you have to remove one of the camshaft sprockets to be able to get that backing plate out of the way to get the water pump removed. Also can work on some crankshaft pulleys and things to hold it in place to remove the bolts. So really, really handy tool. All right, that's pretty much all I've got to show. Did we go through the whole list of tools without one single diagnostics tool? I think we may have. I don't know if that's acceptable. Let me see if I can dig something up for you guys that watch the channel for the purpose, something that helps with diagnostics. I do have something, because you guys have already seen pretty much everything we do for diagnostics anyway. This guy right here, this one violates my rule. I did not pick this up because this will consistently always save me time. I just got this because the concept is just so freaking cool. All right, I don't even know where I found this thing. I'm sure I saw it on some other YouTube channel. This is an Astro 7760. It's a test light. This is a test light. However, if you notice, it does not have a cord attached to it. And that's because it actually uses your body as the ground. So I can just touch on here. See, we got an audible tone, got the indicator light on there, and now I can go around testing for powers without having the cord in the way, which I don't know. Now, is this an absolute necessary time saver that will consistently increase my productivity? Well, most definitely not, but that is just cool as hell. It's got another nice little design here too. And that is the tip of it is actually also a wire piercer as well. So how cool is that? All right, well, I guess sometimes it is acceptable to buy something just because it's cool and no one else can really appreciate it. So what we're going to do now is go to the next part of the video, and we are going to discuss some suggestions that I have for you on tool organization and storage ideas. I think you'll find this part pretty interesting too, because now that you get all these new tools that you can't live without, you got to be able to organize them. And one of the challenges too is you got to be able to remember that you have them, so that in the future, if one comes in handy, you know where it is that you can access it easily. So let's go ahead and take a look at my setup.